Today I'm chopping up die cuts to get the most from my dies. Hello there, Michelle Short here with Terrific Tags with Michelle. I'm here on the Altenew YouTube channel on the first and third Saturday of the month. So if you enjoy my videos, I'd love for you to subscribe. So let's get started. I'm using the beautiful Crafty Flower Lily of the Valley layering die set today. This is so pretty. You've got those large leaves there, and then you've got the Lily of the Valley flower with lots of buds and just really, really beautiful. And the packaging shows you how to put it all together. So I have die cut my pieces from Classic Crest 110 solar white cardstock. I've tried to keep them inside of the negative, and I will share why a little bit later. I have die cut 2 tags using the largest Terrific Tags die from Crafty Necessities Jet Black cardstock. So I'm taking one to use as a guide so that I can see where I want to cut this die cut down. I know that I don't need the whole thing because it's just going to be too big for my size of my tag. So I'm cutting that little piece off there. I can use that for a future project if I want to. And then I've got this piece here which I'm going to use as a leaf. Technically it's kind of part of a leaf. It's a little bit difficult to see here, but it kind of adds onto one of the other leaves, so it looks like the leaf is folded over, but I'm going to use it as a whole leaf. It is a little bit small, but I think it will work out a little bit better than using one of the large leaves. So I've cut that twice, and I'm actually going to cut the stem off of this one, and I'm going to use that as a leaf but upside down. So this is a great way to utilize your die cuts. Don't be afraid to cut them apart, use them in lots of different ways to get the most out of them. So I think that layout is going to work nicely on my tag. So now I can work on the little flower buds, and I want to keep the pieces together. You use the keyhole system to layer everything up, and when it cuts the dies, it cuts the dies so that you've got the base of the flower and then also like a topper piece, and then also sometimes a piece that goes inside for a bit like a stamen. And so I want to make sure that I keep all of those pieces together so I know which topper piece goes on which base. So I'm just being careful here and figuring out which ones I want. I don't need the pieces that go with that kind of part of the die because I'm not using it, and so I just want to try and keep them all together. So I've placed them all on my sticky mat with the pieces next to each other for which go together. I can then add some ink blending on top. Now I want these to look white. Lily of the Valley flowers generally look white, but I do want to add some shading on top just to give them a little bit of dimension. You can do this with lots of different colorways. On the card that I created using this set, which is what I'm kind of making like a accompanying tag for, I used purples, but for today I thought I would use aquas. Greys work really nicely for this as well, but you just want to add a very small amount onto the kind of top of, in this instance, the top of the flower, so it looks like it's in shadow. So I'm going in with the lightest shade of the Sweet Dreams Fresh Dye Ink collection, which is Dewdrops, and I'm using a micro blending brush because I don't want to add too much colour onto these. The base layer, most of it is going to get covered up, so I do want to bring that colour further down towards the bottom of these flowers here, but for the pieces that go on the top, I just want a little bit of shading at the top. I'm now going in with Aqualicious, and I'm just deepening up those shadows a little bit. I don't want to bring this colour down as far as the lighter shade, but I do just want a little bit of extra shading on these. So they're not necessarily going to read as aqua at the moment, they probably do, but once the card is together, I do think the flowers still look like they're white with just a little bit of shading on top. So I can just finish off with the last one here, and then I can move on to the Green Valley Fresh Dye Ink collection, and I'm using the 3 lightest shades and again a micro blending brush, and I've got all of these little pieces here. These are little leaves that go on top of the stem, And I'm just using the lightest shade for these to start with, just kind of adding sort of a layer on top. And then all of these pieces here are kind of like the stamens, and a little bit of the other ones kind of go on top of some of the stem piece. And then because I didn't have a huge amount of space left on my mat, I really should get out my bigger sticky mat, but I tend to use this one for ink blending, so it's a little bit on the smaller side for all of these die cuts that I'm doing today. But I wanted to keep them all in place before I adhere them all together, so that's why I'm just using the one mat and not kind of taking them off and adding more on top like I usually would. So I've got the leaves here that I can add this colour onto as well. And then I can just kind of move them out the way and keep swapping those over as I go. I'm then going in with the second lightest shade and just adding a little bit onto these pieces. I don't want them to be very dark, I want them to still be quite light, but I did just want a little bit of shading on them. And then especially for these leaves, I did want to have a little bit more shading, so I'm going in from the bottom upwards. And then for this stem piece here, I'm being quite random. I'm just adding the darker colour in a few different areas. And then I can go in with the second darkest shade, which is Shadow Creek of the Green Valley inks, and just adding that towards the bottom of these leaves, and then just a tiny little bit here and there on that stem piece. I am going to set these aside to dry for a little while, just for a couple of minutes, to let that ink soak into the cardstock. I'm then going to start assembling my Lily of the Valley. So I've got these kind of bud pieces here. These don't have the keyhole system, but you can easily just see that they line up on top of that base layer on the stem. Just using my tweezers here and a little bit of liquid glue. And then this is the first flower for that keyhole system, so I'm just adding a little bit of liquid glue around where that keyhole is. I can line it up with the keyhole on the stem, and that's going to be in the right place. I can now bring in the top piece for that flower, and then I can add that on top. And that's why it's really helpful to kind of keep them together while you're doing the ink blending, and then also assembling the flower as well. So I've got this one here, and I'm just going to do the exact same thing, lining up that keyhole. And then I didn't realise that there is a layer in between, so I'm going ahead here and adding this top piece on. Thankfully, because I'm using liquid glue and it doesn't dry really quickly, I've got time to lift that off, and I realised at this point that there was supposed to be something else there. It doesn't really matter too much if you leave out some pieces. I think it would still look really pretty, but ideally I wanted, since I've already added the ink blending to the piece, I may as well use it. So I'm just lifting that back off with the tweezers. And then I thought it was this piece and it wasn't, I realised, and so then I can go in with the correct piece. So you just want to pay attention to the shapes of those keyholes, make sure that you're lining everything up properly. So I can line that up with that keyhole there on the flower, and then I can pop this piece on top. I will say that if you don't line them up completely with the keyholes, it's absolutely fine. They do still look really nice, but you do just want to make sure that you've got the right shape. So I've got the triangle one here, I can add the second piece on top, and then that topper piece. And then it is good to look at the back of the packaging as well if you need to, but for most of these it's pretty self-explanatory, as long as you just take your time and making sure that you've got all of the pieces there. So then I've just got this last one here, and I can add that topper piece on, and I just think they look really pretty. I'm now just adding a little bit of glue onto these tiny leaves, and then I can use my perfect picker to pick those up and pop those down. And I'll be honest with you, I wasn't too concerned if the shape of the leaves were perfect. I think it still looks really nice whether they're not quite perfect to the base layer or not. They're so tiny, I don't think it really matters too much. So now I want to add a little bit of interest onto my background. So I'm taking the titanium white artist gouache. I'm just adding a little bit of that onto my non-stick sheet here. And then I can bring in some water and I can mix the two together. I do quite like to have my mixture quite thick. I find that not only does it splatter quite nicely, as long as it's loose enough, it does dry a lot quicker having less water in it. So I do tend to keep it fairly thick. I don't add too much water to it. I can load up that paintbrush and then I can tap that down onto the tag. Now in an ideal world, I was trying to go for more of a diagonal here so that the splatters were really kind of going from the bottom left hand corner to the top right. Splatters tend to have a bit of a, you know, they go where they want to go. So it didn't work out completely like that, but I do like having some areas where there isn't splatter and then some where there is. So I have set that aside to dry for a little while, and now I can add some adhesive onto the back of the Lily of the Valley to adhere that onto the tag. So I'm starting off by cutting some small pieces of instant dimension foam tape, and I can add that onto the back of the flowers. I'm not sure if technically the whole thing is a flower and then these are the little buds, or you would call them the flowers and the whole thing is a plant. I'm not sure. Let me know in the comments if you know the answer to that question. So just adding a small amount of the foam tape. I'm just keep kind of moving it over just to see where I want that foam tape to be on the pieces that are going to overhang the sides of the tag. Now at this point I wasn't sure about this one here and I decided to take that foam tape off. I'll figure out how to stick that down a little bit later. So now I can go ahead and remove the backings off of that foam tape. And then I can add a little bit of liquid glue onto some of the stem pieces. I don't necessarily need these to stick down really well, but I do want to have some glue there just to make sure that they're not going to all be sort of up at the same height as the foam tape. But I don't want to add too much adhesive onto that stem because I want to pop the leaves underneath. So just using my tweezers here just to try and lift that up. And then I can place that down onto the tag. And I kind of just hover it for a little while, see where I want it to be placed before I stick it down. And before I go ahead and actually press anything down, I'm going to bring in these leaves. So I'm just figuring out here where I think they're going to look nice. I did think maybe to try and lift this one up a little bit underneath that flower or the bud or whatever it's called, but I decided to place it down a little bit lower. So just popping that underneath the stem there. And then I've got that other leaf which I am adding on upside down technically. Again, just figuring out where I want that to be placed. I can add some liquid glue onto the back of that and then pop that down. And then I can flip over the tag and then cut those off at the bottom. And then I can just press everything down. And then I was trying to sort of figure out here what to do with that flower sort of overhanging. You can see where the kind of like keyhole system is on the back. So I wasn't sure what to do with that. So I decided to just go ahead and stick down that stem with a little bit more of the liquid glue. And then I thought at this point I may just kind of squish the flower in a little bit onto the tag so that it doesn't overhang so much. And I think that that still looks quite nice, even though that's not necessarily where it's meant to be. I think that that looks okay. And then from the back, obviously you can still see the bit overlapping, but you don't see that keyhole system on the back. So it just looks a little bit neater. I can then bring in the other tag that I cut from the Crafty Necessities Jet Black cardstock, and I can add some glue tape onto the back of that. and then I can sandwich the two tags back to back. This just gives a little bit of stability to the tag, but also makes sure that it's nice and neat on the back if I want to write a personal message, and I would do that with a white gel pen. I can then add some twine through the top of the tag and then tie that in a bow at the front. I did think it would look quite nice maybe to have some white twine here rather than the black twine, but I did just end up going with the black twine that I usually use. So just tying that in a bow and making sure that it's the size that I want it to be. Once I'm happy, I can cut those tails down with some scissors. And then I have stamped and heat embossed a sentiment from the So Happy stamp set. I thought the Just For You would work quite nicely for this tag. I was thinking that I would have it probably as a gift tag, something that I can add on to a gift or a present would look really nice. So that is the tag finished for today. I really love how the flowers pop against that dark background, and having that splatter kind of works as a little bit of an embellishment. So this is the card that I made before. You can see the size of those leaves and why they wouldn't work on that tag, but it's really nice to have a coordinating tag to go with my card now. And although they are slightly different colours, I still think they work really nicely together. Links to the products that I used will be listed in the description bar on YouTube and also over on the Altenew blog. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Hello there, did that video just spark your creativity? And do you want more project ideas and inspiration videos too? Well, if you do, please make sure that you subscribe to the Altenew YouTube channel. Also, make sure that you do click that notification bell so you don't miss a video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye-bye.